Hey everyone, it's Nathan with Crown & Caliber, and we are back with another Crown & Caliber Answers Watch Questions. So recently we did a video where we answered questions that you guys have asked. Through our social media channels like YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, we basically compiled questions that viewers like you have asked and answered them. And so we're doing that again, and we've added in questions also from our client services team. So when people call in and have general watch questions or maybe more specific watch questions, we've taken some of the more popular ones, put them together, and we're going to answer them. So again, I have my friend Jonathan and colleague behind the camera.
That's me.
Yep. And he's going to ask these questions. Some I've seen, some I haven't, and we're just going to go for it. You ready, man?
Let's get it.
Awesome. Let's go.
Also, the reason I'm behind the camera is because somebody needs to be. So,
exactly.
Here's your answer.
Thank you, Jonathan, for running the camera.
Yes. All right. Question number 1. Nathan, why are Navitimers so busy?
That's a good question. So the Navitimer is one of Breitling's probably most prolific watches, and the busyness is kind of twofold. First and foremost, it has a chronograph, which is going to be 3 subdials, sometimes just 2, but generally speaking, 3 subdials on the dial, and that automatically is going to add a lot. Often, chronograph is going to have an additional meter on the bezel, whether it's a tachometer or something like a pulsometer, and so there's additional numbers. But I think what really then puts the Navitimer kind of the next level up is the use of a slide rule. Now the slide rule is something of kind of like a calculator in its own right. It's a pretty dense mathematical tool that you can use for calculating things like, you know, how fast you're traveling, fuel consumption, something as simple as calculating a tip at a restaurant. So it's kind of like an old school computer built right into a wristwatch. And there is somewhat of a learning curve. We actually have a video on how to use a Navitimer, and I'll make sure to leave a link to it in the description. But that is essentially why a Navitimer is so busy, is because of complications, most notably the slide rule.
It's busy because it's complicated.
Yeah, there you go. Onward.
All right, next question. How do you read a GMT complication?
This is a good one. So we actually have a video on how to use a GMT watch, and it gets a lot of comments. It gets a lot of questions. When reading the GMT complication, I think there's 2 things that are most important to keep in mind. So first and foremost, a GMT hand makes 1 revolution around the dial in 24 hours. And compared to an hour hand, which makes 2 revolutions around the dial in 24 hours. And what that means is the hour markers for a GMT hand do not directly correlate to the time. So, 2 examples. If the GMT hand is pointed to the 6 o'clock hour marker, it is 12 p.m. And so that doesn't directly correlate. I think things get a little bit more difficult in the second example when, let's say, the GMT hand is pointed to the 11 o'clock hour marker. Now, that is not 11 p.m. That is actually 10 p.m. because the 11 o'clock hour marker represents 2200 hours. So 1 revolution every 24 hours. The second point that I think can kind of bolster that is if you look at a dial, the right-hand side of the dial, if we're bisecting it vertically, represents morning and day, and the left-hand side of the dial represents evening and night. And so if you're seeing a GMT hand and it's on the right-hand side, it's going to be the morning, afternoon, day. And if it's on the left hand, it's going to be the evening or night. And so that can help kind of keep in mind that big point that a GMT hand makes 1 revolution every 24 hours, and hour markers don't directly correlate to the time.
Right. And then there's the added complexity of a movable GMT bezel. Then you can start calculating different time zones and this and that. Go watch the video.
Yeah, worth checking out. Big takeaway is GMT hand, 1 revolution every 24 hours, thus making the hour markers not directly correlating to the time.
The most useful watch complication.
I agree with that. Absolutely, Jonathan.
All right, moving on. Are there any watches that you feel are overhyped? I say this with a smile because I know.
Oh man, the comments. All right, to me there is one watch that is extremely overhyped. And when I think overhyped, I think some context. I think overhyped in the sense that it is not inherently worth what the market demands. You can use many different definitions on why that is, but
y'all know what's coming.
Nevertheless, I think the Rolex Daytona is overhyped. And I think it's for 2 reasons.
There was a dramatic pause after you said that.
2 reasons. First and foremost, the stainless steel Daytona the lugs are not symmetrical, and this drives me up the wall. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, we have a video where I address this. I'll link it in the description as well. But the Daytona lugs are not symmetrical, and it just, visually speaking, I cannot get past that. I think also visually speaking, not as important, but I want the subdials to kind of bisect right there at the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock horizon, and they don't, which is kind of small, but first and foremost, the lugs are not symmetrical. And then I think second point is the idea of what a Rolex is. I think originally it was a tool watch. It served a purpose. And if you're spending at retail, $11,000, $12,000 for a stainless steel watch, it's not going to necessarily embody that kind of tool watch mentality. And especially when you start to think in the pre-owned market, when they're twice that, it would be almost impossible to have that watch and not treat it preciously because of the amount of money spent. And there are definitely going to be people who it doesn't matter for, and good on you. But for most of us, the idea of spending that kind of money on a watch and then it not getting to fully serve its purpose just speaks to it being overhyped. But I think most importantly, the Daytona is not symmetrical. Why? Drives me crazy. Like, I want to like it. And I like the fact that it's a fully in-house automatic chronograph movement. Like, that to me,
that's cool,
is amazing. I like the fact that it's a completely sealed case, so you have screw down pushers. I think it wears better than any other chronograph. Like,
1000%.
I mean, how thin it is, like, that's the beauty of the in-house movement. It is truly one of the only Rolex watches that has not received a super case treatment.
True, yeah.
Like, it is made.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
Oh, I would be fine with 2 points. Symmetrical case.
Sure, yeah.
And then I would prefer if it had brushed lugs and a fully brushed bracelet. Like, if it was those two things, I would be okay with the offset subdials and a lot of text.
Oh my God, that'd be beautiful.
Because I think those two things would, for me personally, it would dress it down a little. It would almost reinforce the fact that it is still a tool watch. And maybe when I say wanting it to be more of a tool watch, I'm saying I want it to be more of an everyday watch.
You want it more wearable.
And a bunch of high polished surfaces
Not
says,
wearable.
look at me,
That was a good answer. All right, here we go. What do you think is the right size for a men's watch?
So that is...
Right size is a very subjective...
Yeah, I was about to say, this is a really subjective question. So I will tread lightly. The right size for someone like me that has a 6.5-inch wrist and is 5'11" and change is going to be very different than someone who is 6'4" and has a 7.5-inch wrist. So kind of a broad spectrum, 34 millimeters to 42 millimeters is a great place to start. And that's going to be anything from your everyday kind of casual sport watch, something like an Oyster Perpetual or, a Datejust, up until, some of the more sporty kind of tool watches. So, a smaller Super Ocean or even an Omega Speedmaster. And I think that's just a place to start. I think within that parameters, whether you're a 6-inch wrist or you're up to an 8-inch wrist, that can work. What then changes is your perspective and style on watch. So I can wear a 34 millimeter, but I'm almost channeling this kind of, feels like a,
it's a lot more classic.
Yeah, it's a 50s and 60s era kind of styling. I think that's a kind of a personal thing. Like, if I think it looks good, that's what matters. At the same point, I can wear a 42 millimeter. To me personally, it's kind of pushing that on what I feel comfortable wearing, but it doesn't look out of place. So I think a general place to start is kind of 34 millimeters to 42 millimeters. And I think the takeaway is maybe branch outside. If you thought, I can't go below 40.
Push the limit.
Push it. Maybe try a 36. If you said, I can't go above 40, try a 42. And it definitely can open up some options for different models. And I think
it might even confirm some preconceived notions or deny the preconceived notions that you've had about these watches.
Exactly, yeah.
The right size is the one that you're comfortable wearing.
That's good.
Yeah, put your hat on it. All right, next question. I don't know if you want an easy one or a hard one.
Try me.
Here we go. Hey Nathan, what's the deal with paper dates?
Paper dates. All right, so, oh gosh, that's a, I'll try and keep it simple. So,
it's kind of loaded.
Yeah, I know, it is a little loaded. So, but it's a good question. So papers refer to what's called an international warranty. Originally, it was a piece of paper, an international warranty, and you would receive it when you would purchase a watch new from an authorized retailer. Those have evolved to often be a credit card with a magnetic strip and the information. There are even some digital international warranties, but kind of that synonymous term is still papers. A paper date most often means two things. It means a watch was purchased through an authorized dealer, an authorized retailer, and that date refers to the date in which it was purchased. So it speaks a little bit to the history of the watch. You know when it was purchased, if a specific date is important to you. It also kind of validates that purchase. If you're a person that likes a full set, then having the papers filled out with the date means you can trace the history of the watch a little bit more. You can see, oh, it was purchased through this authorized dealer, and then I purchased it. So kind of those two things. And I think that's where it's gained a lot of, say, traction in collecting is people like a full set. And I believe that there is some thought, especially when you're looking at vintage watches, well, if there is a full set, that must mean that that individual that would keep everything probably took better care of the watch. And there is some speculation and stretch there, but I do think that is kind of this underlying thought. If I'm looking for a vintage watch and it has a full set, papers with a paper date, that means it was purchased through an authorized dealer and, it's been meticulously taken care of, which I don't think there's any correlation to, but I think that is a lot of where the paper dates come from. If it's important to you, it's important, but I wouldn't let it stop you from purchasing a watch that you really want.
All right, next question. Is polishing a watch bad?
I think there's two sides to it. I think the first side, first and foremost, polishing a watch is not bad. Polishing a watch means that inherently you are going in and you are on a micro scale removing material to make a watch appear new again.
That happens when you polish anything.
Exactly. It's not bad. I think it has gained a negative connotation because of the vintage market, and wanting a vintage watch that is unpolished kind of speaks to maybe a more holistic watch, similar to having a full set or having a watch with papers and the paper date. You begin to speculate, well, that must have been better taken care of. And I think a vintage watch that has been polished, I think there maybe was this older idea of, well, just make it look new again, make it look new again. And after 30 years, 40 years, it wasn't polished once. It may have been polished, a dozen times. And that starts to add up. That is actually going to be a noticeable amount of material removed, which means, most importantly, the case shape, the case architecture has now ever so slightly changed. And I think that is where it has gained a negative connotation. And I think it is worth noting, if you're looking at a vintage watch that has been polished so much it's starting to look like a bar of soap, that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean when the case shape changes? What does that mean?
So you think about a great example, talking about vintage watches, is a Rolex. Often older Rolex have these really beautiful chamfers where the top of the lug and the side of the case meet. And a chamfer is a small, kind of high polished surface that creates a new face. And it's a very small face, and if you begin to polish again and again, that face is going to eventually disappear. And so what happens is you have a case that doesn't necessarily have the crisp, sharp lines when it was original, when it was brand new. And that has been kind of achieved by multiple polishes over time. So that's kind of the negative side. I think the positive side is if you are having a watch refinished, make sure that the person who's refinishing it knows what they're doing and first and foremost cares about the case architecture and the integrity of that shape. And if it's a matter of saying, hey, I just want to clean up maybe the bracelet, or kind of straighten out the lines of the brushed finish on the bracelet, that's okay. But I do think there's two sides of that coin. So just be aware, but know that polishing is not inherently all bad. And yeah, be smart when you're looking at a watch that has been polished.
Cool. Great.